We're running behind, so we should kick this off quickly. We have a really diverse panel here with us. Today we have folks who've got operating experience in healthcare, entrepreneur in healthcare, early stage investors in healthcare, late stage investors in healthcare, and also consulting experience in healthcare. So I think we're going to have a really good discussion. And I think the devil will lie in the detail. We've already had a couple of speakers tell us that there's going to be tremendous opportunity in this sector going forward for a whole bunch of reasons, more macro-related type of reasons. But I think what we have to challenge and question ourselves is that how many real deals are there out in the healthcare sector, which subsegments are really the most attractive. And if you look at the history of healthcare investing in private equity, the last 4 years, as again Sumit put up, or I think it was Neeta put up, saw investments of about $1 billion each. But I noticed very interestingly that on the delivery side, the investment seems to be panning off. And on the medical, on the diagnostic side, there've been some investments as well. So the questions we'll ask is that, is delivery not so attractive anymore, and those sort of areas. I'll do a very, very quick introduction. Sumit, you've already kind of introduced yourself. He's India Value Fund, operator with the director and an operator with the fund, works with his portfolio companies in operating intervention. Earlier was with J&J in medical devices and also with Bain & Co as a consultant. Vishal, I'm not quite sure you need an introduction. TPG, head of Asia's TPG Growth, also an early stage in venture in your own personal capacity. You've had over 20 years of experience in healthcare operations, running businesses across Asia. You've made investments in India and also in Sri Lanka. And Aditya, you're with the Seed Fund, the United Seed Fund, so you're more entrepreneur, technology-oriented. I think it'll be really interesting to get your views in terms of the innovations that you're seeing, the opportunities you're seeing in early stage, which potentially can be opportunities for these folks in the future. And then Samanai is with Bain Capital. Bain's a global fund as well, like TPG. Both are very focused on investing in healthcare. Samanai, you haven't yet, Bain hasn't yet done an investment in healthcare in India, but I know you're very focused on it. So your views on what are some of the challenges that you actually see. So I'll kick off with a question for all of you. Actually, it's more a generic question, and then we can go into specifics. But really across the healthcare spectrum, multi-specialty, single specialty, diagnostics, devices, medtech, early stage, where do each of you feel are the best opportunities for investment today? So Sumit, can I kick that off with you?
So that's a pretty broad question, actually. So the way I'd say, I'd firstly give a very generic answer that there are bright spots in every segment to look at. But specifically to your question about has healthcare delivery or the provider sector lost steam? Definitely not. We do realize that primary care is going to take a lot of time for the organized sector to really make money from and create value in. But we still see a lot of steam in the tertiary sector in terms of, but of course, being able to build that particular business model where you can provide quality care with controlled cost is something which we are always on the lookout for. And we have actually come across some very interesting areas in tertiary sector here. In single specialty, I'm sure a lot of my co-panelists will talk about, we have been particularly very excited about the birthing and maternity care, and we've recently invested in Cloud9. The way we look at this particular sector is, the segment, is that this should be a segment which provides some kind of differentiation, either to the customer or to the doctor or to the operations. And interestingly, birthing is that one sector where you can actually create a completely different experience for the customer. Birthing is a wellness, a celebration experience, unlike an illness or infection-ridden problem like you see in the rest of the healthcare. And hence, for the customer, it's a huge value proposition to have a separate birthing center. For the doctors, it's a huge value proposition because they have the OT for themselves. They can do a lot more volumes. And this is one segment where there is so much predictability. You know that the end customer will come for 9 months. There's so much of standardization and protocoling which can be done, which actually brings down the costs. And these are 3 key reasons why we have been quite attracted towards this particular segment. There are many other segments which seem interesting, but we haven't been able to come across a more or a low risk business model across the other segments. If I look at the other areas of healthcare, we've been quite hot on the insurance sector and the TPAs actually right now, because we expect that particular segment to actually grow.
So, Vikram, I think it all depends on with which lens you're looking at the sector, right? So, you know, if you put on your hat from a perspective of scaled-up ventures, I think healthcare across the value chain still has a lot of potential left in it for investment. I don't think this waning off effect, as we see on the delivery side, is really out there. I think what's really happening is fundamentally that the number of companies that you see which have sort of scaled up profitably, you don't really see many of them out there. And I think that's the lens with which everybody is beginning to look at things, you know, metrics, what's happening with return on capital and stuff like that. So, you know, in our own world at TPG Growth, we've done a lot of work over the last 6-7 months. We invested in Sri Lanka, as you said, which is a multi-specialty format, highly profitable venture, and we felt that the metrics were really playing out very well over there. Here in India, we have done 2 single specialty deals. We've done oncology, roll-up of putting up oncology centers across the country. I believe there's a lot of space left in that particular specialty area because highly underpenetrated. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to scale up in that particular specialty zone. We, you know, like IVFA, we've done a mother and child platform. Again, early stage, but we feel that that's again an area where there's a lot of future potential. And you know, then when you start looking at it from a venture side and what kind of potential models you see from a venture investing perspective, obviously home health is, you know, I want to be agnostic over here, but in terms of that's obviously an area where one believes that there is tremendous potential in the future. We see a lot of very exciting work happening on the devices side. You know, at TPG itself, we've invested in Sutures India, which is a big platform play for us right now. And of course, you know, we've also done a very large multi-specialty investment through Manipal. So we strongly believe that there is still a lot of headroom available across the entire chain. Diagnostics is an area where we've not done work, but we still believe that there is a lot left over there. But there is obviously the push now to see and be a little bit more critical in terms of the metrics that are playing out within the company and how you see future growth getting unlocked inside that enterprise.
From our perspective, we tend to be the first institutional investor behind innovation. So we operate out of 2 funds. One is an India-focused fund for $50 million, and the other is an emerging markets fund focused on Latin America, Africa, and other parts of Asia. So the needs in healthcare tend to be quite comparable. We see innovation coming in 3 broad areas. One is low-cost medical devices. I'll give you an example of one of our portfolio companies in a minute, but I agree with Vishal. Medical devices and you know, that area we are seeing a lot of innovation coming out, particularly from India. Second is services innovation, primarily using smartphones or mobile as the vehicle of, you know, final mile communication to both the providers as well as to the patients. A lot of you know, including telemedicine, and we have a portfolio company of ours which is just getting acquired by a US strategic player within 2 years, and it's a company out of Chennai using telemedicine. The third is, I would say, personalized analytics and genomics, that whole area. We see a lot of, you know, smart talent really focusing on that. So those are the 3 areas. Just to give you a couple of examples by what we mean, one of our investments is a company called UE Life Sciences. Coincidentally, it's just literally a 10-minute drive from here. The founder is someone who worked at the Drexel incubator in Philadelphia and has been with Drexel and Penn incubator for about, you know, 10 plus years. The company is UE Life Sciences, low-cost breast cancer screening. Literally, with less than 100 rupees a breast scan, you can actually get clinical research has shown its similar efficacy as mammography. It's no touch. The government of Maharashtra has just announced it's deploying it over 3 lakh women. There are 4 other state governments now considering to deploy it. So it's a breakthrough in terms of breast cancer screening. It's actually thermal mapping of the breast tissues and using that technology. It's literally a device this size. It's being made in India now. So that's an example of a low-cost breakthrough sort of medical device. Technology transfer from the US, emerging markets focus, India being now the hub to create this value. There's another company in the services side, Wellcare, which is just getting acquired by a US strategic player. It uses telemedicine, creating a hub and spoke model for eye care for children and diabetic patients and others. So those are examples, but we see a lot of innovation coming from India. Some of them tend to be at the labs. We do get into universities and both in the US as well as in India to see what's coming out for emerging markets in India. But those 3 broad areas is where we are seeing action.
Vikram, like you rightly pointed out, healthcare is among the top 3 verticals for Bain Capital globally, and it's a sector we're very passionate and excited about. If you look at how we've started investing in India in the healthcare aspect of things, we actually started more from the product side of it. The 22 billion of the 72 billion where we made an investment in a generics company named MCure. I think the other area, and we are a little more focused on that aspect, is to make a play in the 50% of the healthcare value chain, right? Which is basically the healthcare delivery services. Globally, some of our best deals, HCA, which generated more than $5 billion of profit for its investors, have come from that format. We recently invested in China in a group called Asia Pacific Medical Group, which is an onco and neuro-focused chain. And we think there's a lot more promise out there in India, with corporate chains being only less than 5% of the beds. So, and at the scale at which we're looking to deploy capital, it would need to be, one of the top 10, 15 corporate chains in a multi-specialty format. The macro there is super compelling, right? Pick any metric, healthcare GDP, beds per capita, anything on any of our investment committee slides looks very attractive. I think the tension comes in the micro when the rubber hits the road, and I'm sure we'll debate a lot more on that out here.
I'm sure you've looked at lots of opportunity, both in single specialty and multi-specialty as well. And what are some of the challenges in the micro that's making you hesitate or making other funds hesitate from potentially making an investment?
Yeah, I would say that, even if you look at the most successful hospital chains in India and you try and unpack them.
Is that working?
Can folks hear? Yeah. I think even if you look at the most, the bellwethers in the market and you try and unpack them, you'll at best try and, arrive at a business that generates mid-teens to high-teens return on capital. Single individual hospitals might be doing better. And when you look at what drives that, you will find that, 60 and in some cases 100% of the profit pool comes for, a couple of hospitals. It could be a Chennai cluster for someone, it could be a Bangalore from someone. But the reality is it's a couple of hometown flagship hospitals that are generating a bulk of the profit. And a lot of the reason underlying that is I'm not sure that as an industry and as a set of chains, we've really figured out what it means to operate as a chain, right? Are we getting the same set of practices? Are we going into different locations and able to ramp up successfully? I think that is a little bit of, the tension that lies there. We are very much in the first innings. In some areas like branding and consumable sourcing, I think we've done a better job. But if you had to ask, do people have a playbook by which you can get into other areas, open up newer avenues of growth? I think the answer to that is maybe. I don't think it's compellingly yes. And remember, the hospital business
Not proven as yet.
Yeah, and the hospital business is a tough business. It's a very attractive business, but you got to fill it bed by bed, hospital by hospital, build the next hospital, have it ramp, and therein lies an attractive story. So short story is that I think there is no dearth of opportunities, but I think we're in the innings 1 of the playbook, right? And I think it's meant for operators in the room and investors like us to jointly come together and figure out how is it that you can have a more systematic playbook which you can roll out and capture the macro.
Okay, Vishal, I'm just wondering whether you can shed some light on that. I mean, just picking up on Samanoi's point that you don't actually have this standardized playbook across different geographies in the Indian marketplace. A related question to that is that how do some of these models have to change to be able to make that return of capital of 20+% in a tier 2, tier 3 town? I mean, the cost of manpower, the cost of utility, the capex per bed is still going to be very high, but the affordability is just going to be so low. So one of Samanai's points is like the Chennai cluster does really well, but the moment they go from Chennai into a suburban area, into a smaller town, they don't tend to be that successful, and you don't seem to have found the answer to what model will actually work. Is there some insight you can share there?
No, I think you're absolutely spot on, Vikram. I think the challenge which lies in the Indian healthcare delivery space is that we've always seen it till very recently from the supply side, right? We've always believed that you build a hospital, you open up beds, and everything will get filled up. Now, we know enough and more examples around the country where there are hospitals which are brimming at 90% occupancy, and then there are hospitals which are still struggling with 30 and 40% occupancy. Why is that so? In a country of 1.2 billion people, the more number of beds you create, the more should be the consumption. But I think the challenge lies on the unlocking of the demand side. And that, to my mind, is one of the biggest change drivers that we need to focus on in terms of healthcare delivery in India. And that's again, the thesis around what's really going to play out in the future. Because, this is a country where every market is different. This is a country where consumers play a very, very different role in each one of the markets. And we just cannot take the consumer for granted here anymore. And I think that's exactly what we have been doing all this time. We've always believed that there is a large pool of those consumers out there, and it's a no-brainer that they will need healthcare. But, there are not enough levers being pressed for unlocking the demand side. And I think that's question number one in terms of, why some of the enterprises are, irrespective of networks. And I think this entire theme around, is there a network effect? And I'm sure that you guys would have probably talked about it in your own report, that, it's more a myth in terms of, has everybody unlocked the network effect? I don't think that there is at least an evidence right now amongst all the large chains, and, I've been a part of all this system for a fairly long period of time, that I think the network impact is still to be seen. And there'll be a lot more concentrated attempt now in all the large chains to actually bring out the network impact.
Sumit, would you be able to share any more insight, given India Valley Fund's operating background, the fact that you've invested both in multi-speciality and single speciality? What sort of operating interventions have you supported some of these portfolio companies? Is there a network impact getting created, starting to be seen in some areas at least?
So I completely agree with Vishal here, is that the network effect hasn't really been taken advantage of so far. We are seeing, firstly, to Shumano's point, is the very fact that there is so much more scope for operational improvement makes it more exciting for us, because as India Value Fund, we typically get involved in the day-to-day operations of these healthcare firms. And we see a lot of intervention in terms of general protocol standardization, which is actually helping our national level chains to a large extent in terms of bringing some predictability in terms of workflow management. The areas when we look at when we are trying to improve operations in these firms is very similar to what I think your report says. There's one part of making sure that there is high asset turnover, which is all the pricing side and the revenue generation side. There's the EBITDA management, and then there are some enablers we look at. So while the pricing side always talks about the local issues and the catchment area footfalls and stuff, one thing which has actually made a huge difference across all hospitals is just the focus on the product mix, which has actually made a huge difference. Just identifying the right set of customers who need a lot more care and the set of cares which bring you a lot more profitability. makes a huge difference, and just standardizing this particular thinking across all the hospitals has led to a lot of value creation. When it comes to EBITDA management, those are the normal things which you see across industries, be it procurement management and manpower. There's a lot of scope for reduction. However, what makes healthcare very different from other industries is that you have a huge stakeholder called the doctor sitting right in the middle, and the doctor needs to be convinced about all the steps you take. It's very easy to show value theoretically, but it is a long drawn process to actually make it work on the ground. But final aspects of enablers where we see a lot of interesting things to be done is apart from IT, processes, HR, etc. One thing which we think has been missed out by healthcare so far is understanding the importance of doctor in the overall system. A lot of corporates try to make the mistake of saying that I will build a brand and I will build the bargaining power against the doctor. This is not going to change, is something which we have realized. The doctor is going to remain a very, very important part of the system, and hence we need to create an atmosphere, an ecosystem for the doctor where the doctors can thrive, where the doctors feel that they're growing, where the doctors go out and tell their friends that, this is a great place to work. And like what other industries typically do so well for all their employees. Unfortunately, healthcare, something which we see is that there's always a me versus us versus them kind of a discussion happening between the doctor and management. And we're trying to bridge that gap. And we think that is something which is actually going to bring about a huge change in the way this whole healthcare system will work in the future.
Okay, thank you for those insights. Both of you, Vishal and Sumit, spoke about the fact that you're excited in mother and child, you've also invested, and also oncology. So I guess the question I want to ask really is that if you're looking at a 5-year horizon of investment, then what is the play to grow these businesses rapidly so that you can make the returns that you're expecting? I think that if you look at a much longer period of investment, say 15 years, I mean, the answer is pretty obvious. These are sub-segments where you should invest in quite simply from the demand side and all the other various points of debate. But in a 5-year horizon, how will you scale these businesses up? Is it like a platform thing? You'll do some more acquisitions? What are you folks thinking about?
So Vikram, on the mother and child side of the business, I think the advantage over there which I see is that it's low capex, it's asset light. You don't need to go and put these 100 beds, 200 beds kind of units. The sweet spot of that is, 75 beds, 50 to 75 beds, including the compendium of the NICU and, all the other stratification of beds that we have. And that is an easy build. Today, our biggest issues are making the 250 and the 300 bed hospitals happen because real estate, then put the buildings and then equip them and therefore the long gestation period. So, and there are a lot of brownfield opportunities that are there in that space today, because there is a lot of real estate availability on the brownfield side of things, which can be very quickly converted into these boutique mother and child centers. So, within the 5 years horizon, I believe that this is a play out that can work very well.
But will this just be a play out largely in the urban centers, or will this be a play out also in going to some tier 2?
I think, frankly, Vikram, it's basically the tier 1 cities and the metro cities, and probably very few of the tier 2 cities, because you need a certain degree of consumer acceptance around a model like this. In our tier 2 and the tier 3 cities, there are enough number of fantastic nursing homes which are still probably delivering the same outputs, right? And the relationship of the gynecologist with the patients and, that whole spectrum is very well laid out. On the oncology side, the way that at least we see it is that there is a big opportunity in that space because many of the multi-specialty hospitals have actually not invested enough behind oncology all these years. And the reason at that given point in time was oncology was high capex, oncology was high demand in terms of the kind of clinical capabilities and what you needed within the spectrum of the multi-specialty hospitals. So there is a plug and play possibility over here, particularly in terms of partnership models and creating the opportunity to do oncology inside the large multi-specialty hospitals which do not have an oncology play out. And I believe that again in the next 5 years, one can do a lot more. So that's the reason why in both these specialty areas, I believe that there is an opportunity for ramp up within the 5-year horizon.
Sumit, your comments on mother and child as well, please.
Oh, I think I wouldn't have anything more to add in there. So the growth is definitely going to come from newer centers, majorly in the metros and the tier 1 towns, because like I said earlier as well, I don't think the model for tier 2 has been cracked yet in terms of managing the almost similar capex, but the lower price points that you typically get in these markets. But additionally, another very important thing which I would also say in terms of operations is there's a lot of, this is one care where there's a lot of predictability, because you know what is going to happen to the mother or to the pregnant woman month over month. And hence, setting these clinical protocols and taking advantage of the standardization is something which is also going to create a lot of value.
Are there any other single specialty models that can be built out in a similar way, I mean, besides oncology and mother and child, that you also see as exciting?
So I know that a couple of folks have tried the ophthalmology model, and some of it is working, and some of them are still very regional, but do we really have a pan-India play in that? Probably not as yet, but I do believe that ophthalmology is another one where a similar kind of opportunity is there. Because I think, Vikram, we have all realized over a period of time that ultimately what will deliver value in healthcare investments is how do you create the whole aspect of capex a little lighter. Right, and that's the only one which is really going to deliver the returns, right? Otherwise, we are all going to sit on very suboptimal kind of opportunities. So wherever you do see that opportunity and the opportunity of quicker scale up, the chances of us hitting the investment thesis is probably much better.
Aditya, let me ask you a question to continue with health innovation, health IT, and early stage opportunities. You spoke about some of the examples we invested in, but can you give a more wider perspective again in which aspects you find to be the most exciting at this particular point in time?
Yeah, I think from our vantage point, we get involved with entrepreneurs with sometimes pre-commercialization, right, with IP. What's exciting to us most is how do you hands-on help them to start unlocking the value. So to us, building an ecosystem for them is actually very critical. And what do we mean by that? So we have a global partnership with Pfizer. We just this Friday are about to announce in the medical devices space a partnership in early stage innovation across India and emerging markets with a Fortune 50 company at their global headquarters level. Basically, we look at our roles when we work with these early stage innovators as connecting the dots. We're not experts in every aspect of the business, regulatory, commercialization, distribution, IP development. So what we try to do is build a cohesive ecosystem focused on various segments that can actually be incentivized and motivated to work literally nearly at a real-time basis with the entrepreneurs, because a lot of this is early stage IP development. Generally, some of our investments tend to be 12 to 18 months away from commercialization, particularly low-cost medical devices. I think in terms of healthcare IT or the services innovation or the analytics, I think it's little less dependent on the ecosystem. So a lot of our focus is around building that ecosystem for the entrepreneurs. To give you an example, on UE Life Sciences, we've got Manipal Hospital through RN Capital as investors behind them. They're doing a lot of the help and handholding around the clinical research and some of the efficacy kind of studies which are crucial. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw has come in as a personal investor behind the company. She brings a wealth of expertise and experience around scaling, thinking through distribution, thinking through doctors and other kind of sort of stakeholders in the system. So those are the kind of things that we tend to help on. Healthcare, as you would know, is very complex from an ecosystem perspective. So public health becomes an important element of the whole, given the kind of investments in the delivery that the public sector is making. So we tend to sort of create these vibrant ecosystems. There tend to be two challenges there. One is most of these ecosystems tend to be regional. So, creating, you have to sort of create it in different regions. They don't tend to expand across India or even across emerging markets. The second is they tend to be segment-based. It's very difficult to cross segments when you're trying to create. So it's a fair amount of hand-holding and creating a vibrant structure.
Thank you. Are you seeing any innovation on the health side on data gathering, data analytics, data management? Because I mean that's got to be a major opportunity for us in India, simply because again we're so diverse. But is there anything emerging on that? I know the government has made attempts, for example, in Jammu and Kashmir. But is there anything on the private side that is emerging at all?
Yes. So I think the impetus for a lot of data-driven, particularly as you look at the masses, right? Where the Aadhaar structure that's come into place as a platform and through its APIs are actually lending some very interesting models. All of this is very early stage, right? But I do think around the depth of the data, the velocity of the data between providers, patients, and the other stakeholders, and the volume of data, we are seeing a lot of interesting, I would say at least a couple of them come in mind. They're Bangalore-based analytics companies. I think the natural challenge would be, bringing the ecosystem around them. They're all sort of, Aadhaar in itself is spinning off a lot of.
Could you describe that more so we can kind of understand it better in terms of what they're doing?
Yeah, so without divulging too much private information around those companies, one of them is actually looking to create a healthcare database that is accessible to the patients and the providers in real time, and portability of the data using mobile applications. So that's an example, which is then also then bringing in big data and analytics around cohorts and those kind of around diagnostics. So those are some of the kind of stuff that we are seeing. Heavy use of, personalization, a lot of data, and the real-time transportability around this data.
Yeah, Vishal.
So Vikram, it's interesting that you bring this point up, because I think one of the key competitive index which we are going to see emerge in the healthcare space, of which nobody has done much, is around this whole game of outcomes. Right? And until and unless you begin to start looking at data, you're never really going to be able to look at your outcomes. So if we really want to create a high degree of, we talked about what will really create premium, right? What will really create premium, and world over we have seen it enough and more by now, that what creates premium is the consumer's acceptance around the fact that you are actually a premium provider.
Yeah.
And that premium provider comes only out of somebody who demonstrates better outcomes. And I think the real value lies in the outcome. So a lot of this data and, and the push for data also has to come around the fact that we will sooner or later start providing a premium to healthcare outcomes. And whether it's the larger chains, smaller chains, irrespective of which part of the value chain you participate in, but ultimately it's the outcomes which are really going to help you create that premiumness. And I think the lot of push that we are seeing on the data side today on the healthcare delivery side is very positive for this sector.
Thank you. Sam and I was just trying to get your perspective on exits so far in healthcare. I mean, that's something you would obviously look at as you look to make investments. I mean, the sector's really been invested in the last 4 or 5 years. There probably haven't been that many exits. We've seen some high-value exits on the diagnostics side, simply because some of those companies have gone public. On the multi-speciality side, I don't think we've seen significant exits. So your perspectives on just how has the healthcare sector performed for private equity today?
So I would say, if I could wind back the clock, investing 4 years ago would have been a better idea, just given what's happened with multiples so far. But you're right that I think that, I'm sure VCCircle has the data, but I guess when we get a chance to look at it, I would say it's been a so-so outcome, right? I think partly because, a lot of the returns got eroded away in, the USD INR FX movement in the last 4 years. I think it's a better story when it comes to rupee returns. But if you look at, where the return has come from, in a lot of cases, 40, 50% of the value creation would have been, through multiple expansion, right? People who invested 4 or 5 years ago, probably invested at low to mid-teens. Today, if I don't even say high teens or 20s, my banker friends in the room will throw me out of the room, right? I won't even get a management meeting. I say that not from, it's not a good thing to get multiple expansion, but when you've got assets in the market trading at 25, 30 times EBITDA, 25 times the next 12 months EBITDA, are you really going to underwrite multiple expansion if you were an investor at this point in time? And I don't blame the founders because they're seeing what public markets are getting, and they should expect that rightfully so. But I guess what that means is that the impetus on the EBITDA growth needs to be even higher. Yeah. Because all of us are here looking to make 22, 25% return out there, and most hospital chains, if you go back and see how much have they really grown EBITDA, I would say if you've got a 20% story, over a 4 or 5 year period, that's a pretty darn good outcome. Yeah. And from there, people have historically relied on multiple expansion to get their returns. I just think it's tougher to argue for that, at this point in time.
But then you have a challenge, right? Because they all said the unanswered question on standardization of, procedures, practices. How do these models work in tier 2, tier 3? Because if expansion is going to kind of take place there, right? So that question still remains unanswered because if you're saying that, hey, I can't really have, if I'm going to have an EBITDA expansion, then how am I actually going to go about going to get it, particularly in the multi-specialty area?
That's true. So I just think the bar and conviction on your operating drivers is higher in this kind of an environment, right? When you're asked to pay up full price, and rightly so if I was a founder, I'd expect that. But I think the conviction on that, and hence the pause, and hence people assessing, and hence figuring out, what has worked historically in terms of growth drivers, does that really work going forward? I think that's where you're seeing a lot of the discussion and debate in some of the transactions being run right now.
So I think none of you folks have invested in diagnostics, right, as yet, or not yet, right? So it'll be great to get your viewpoints on that segment of healthcare. So Vishal, why don't you go first and give us a perspective? Are there opportunities in diagnostics?
Yeah, I think my good friend Om is here, and which better company to model around than Dr. Lal's? Dr. Viramani is here, and ThyroCare, and we've seen the success of these enterprises actually demonstrate the huge value proposition that continues to exist on the diagnostic side of the business. I think what we're seeing right now, and of course, when you go back into the history of these entities, they have spent decades of hard work in scaling up these companies, right? And so while we are seeing many regional players in diagnostics emerge, we are still to see, a company which has sort of gone as pan-India as many of them. But I think diagnostics continues to be an opportunity to go after. There is a lot of headroom, as I keep saying, even in that space, because again, there are regional players who are doing it right, producing margins, their ability to make themselves pan-India.
But let me then ask you, interrupt you and say, of course, Dr. Lal's and 5 or 6 of the players who've been really successful, but then it tends to fall off like a cliff, right? I mean, the next player down is some small regional player, wherever, in Calcutta or in the south or in the north, and they don't seem to have the ability to scale up. So what is it that's preventing them from doing so?
So I think, Vikram, it's not a question of that they have not scaled up or they don't have the ability to scale up. I think if you look at the history, and that's why I said there is a function of time here, right? We are now beginning to get a little hyper in healthcare, right? So we are looking at deals and we are saying, okay, can you grow 300% over the next 3 years? And there is no enterprise which grows at that pace, and we know that's a reality until and unless it's not just a function of capital. I think it's a function of execution. And that's what is also missing in healthcare a lot, that the capital is out there, there's enough and more capital chasing good healthcare companies, but do these companies have the ability to sort of execute to the pace at which the capital is available to them? The answer is no. Yeah. And I think that's where the big gap lies, that until and unless you professionalize yourself, until and unless you bring in high-grade management talent, until and unless you create a process around an enterprise which actually makes you scale up faster, it's not just a function of capital anymore. And I think why you find many of these regional players continuing to remain regional is because of the way that they are growing their businesses. They are comfortable with those regions, they are comfortable with the medical communities there, they are comfortable with the consumer groups over there, and that's why you find them very, very centric to that geography. And that's what needs to change. So I think even in diagnostics, we should see more national chains emerge, and there is enough and more opportunity in that space to grow.
Sumit, do you have any further comments to add on diagnostics?
Actually, we have shied away from investing in diagnostics, and there has been thoughts that we missed out on some really good returns, for sure. So just building on what Vishal said, I think, yeah, it does take a lot of execution focus in terms of aggregating into a larger player. One of the risks we see in diagnostics going forward is being able to defend with the potential low-cost options coming in with the low-cost Chinese equipments and procedures. If the technology there changes, is something which we see as a certain risk. And what really is needed, we think, in diagnostics is to create a very, very clear value proposition to differentiate the men against the boys, and which can actually defend their market shares going forward. And this is something which we are quite closely watching in terms of how it will happen to see the onslaught of low-cost competition coming in the future.
Thank you. I'd like to then pick up on a point that you talked about, Vishal, which is ability to execute in management teams. We've seen in the IT sector a lot of very high caliber management teams emerge, and they have, and you've been able to therefore fund those businesses, support them, and build out new businesses. Are there high quality management teams in the healthcare sector as a general? I mean, I'm not going down by a particular sub-segment, but say across the delivery side and the diagnostic side, are there high quality management teams out there that potentially you can back? Savana, you want to go first?
Yeah, I would say the answer is no. The short answer is no. And whoever is there is probably working with Vishal already. But because I think if you see how these companies have evolved, they've historically been, founder doctors, right? Who set up a hospital, or has been a family that set up a hospital chain. And, over a period of time, there's been some rotation of corporate management. But, I cover the tech sector, I cover the pharma sector as well. And, when you contrast the quality of management, there is a lot of high promising talent at the middle level. Like they would have run regions, they would have run zones. But, are they CEOs you could back in a takeout situation? I think that number is on single digits, in one hand, or maybe at best two hands. So I do think there is a paucity of managerial talent. I think you have seen situations where managers have come from outside the industry. I don't think it's uncommon to experience that. Though I would say healthcare is one industry where you don't want people to come from outside the industry, because it's going to take that person a long time to figure it out. So I think that is very true. I think there is a shortage of very senior, experienced managerial talent, and I think that will change in 3 or 4 years.
Bringing in people from overseas, would that help?
I'm sorry?
Bringing in talent, healthcare talent from overseas, would that help at all? Or it's just too unique, the Indian market is just so unique as usual, so that's not going to work?
Yeah, I mean, it would obviously depend on the individual, but, if there's one business that's local, it's healthcare. Even within a country, it's different in a state, it's different in a city. It's pretty cultural. So, the bias would be to find homegrown talent. And I think, 2 to 3 years from now, people who have run zones and regions would have had that experience. And I think, that's not going to be a problem in a couple of years. But I think today there is a paucity. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Vishal?
There is no doubt that we need more professionals in this sector. I think, if you look at healthcare, the way that we still continue to run it today, we are still running 21st century healthcare with 19th century management principles. And that's really not going to take the sector far. And that's why I keep emphasizing every time that why should a sector of this size have a handful of professionals? You can count them, right? And you can count the top 10 guys in the sector.
Maybe they don't earn enough money. Maybe that's one reason, right?
No, but I think, Vikram, I think...
Or they aren't offered equity by the owners and the promoters and that kind of stuff, right?
I think this is a sector in transition, right? And it better transit itself fast. because, as we've seen in many of the other sectors, I think healthcare is probably the last one which has to professionalize faster, deeper, and quicker in terms of the getting, and to Samanoy's point, I think this is a sector which will do a lot good for itself by even getting talent from the other sectors even within the country. So while I'm not a big believer that guys who come from outside of India will be able to really contribute much into the India healthcare story as of right now, because it just takes them 2 years to really understand what really kicks in here. But I think getting talent from, there is enough and more talent in FMCG. There is enough and more talent which is there on the hospitality side. There is enough and more talent which is there on the IT side. People have scaled up companies and scaled up different verticals of companies. Why shouldn't they look at healthcare as their next big opportunity? And that is the reason why, Vikram, today when you look at the entire startup ecosystem in healthcare, which one of them actually is coming from hardcore healthcare experience? And why are some of those companies accelerating and growing so fast? It's basically because they are applying the thought process of some of the other sectors and creating the opportunity in healthcare. So we need to do a lot more, and I guess more managerial talent, and the transition from family-run enterprises into professionally run enterprises is absolutely the need as far as this sector is concerned.
Thank you. Please.
I'd like to just to add, from an early stage perspective, we're seeing the same thing. The founders are very good at what they do, but to actually create that scalable business capability around them requires a multi-dimensional leadership. And that's where some of our focus tends to be. It's a similar thing, but to Samanoy's point, I think it's very difficult to do what the founders are actually they're capable of doing. So it's a very humbling exercise to understand the depth of their expertise and then create the business capabilities around them.
Thank you, Vishal. Folks, I hope you found this session to be insightful. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.